So yeah, I ended up fooling around with Bunny yet again. Not like that, get your mind out of the gutter. I recently released a Bunny video where it was infinite sprint. So yeah, her second ability had insane uptime. It had insane range coverage up to 30 meters. Actually, it was 27, but 30 meters just sound better. So I could hit a lot of enemies, run forever, and dealt decent damage. Now, the one thing about that build is that I completely removed crit out of the equation and focused more on raw power, infinite uptime on the 2, and range. There was definitely a lot of people who enjoyed that type of playstyle and they liked running forever. And then there were some people who were like, oh, there's no crit. It's a bad Bunny. The one thing you have to know, guys, Bunny has 10% crit chance, and the highest amount of crit you can get with all the crit mods is 30%. That left me wondering, is there a way I can get crit on Bunny, but also have infinite sprint? Well, nearly infinite at this point. And that's when I had a few synergies come into play. Synergies using the blue Beetle and actually having mana recovery modifiers. So with this particular Bunny loadout, I can get 36% crit rate and a 4 times critical damage multiplier. That's actually bigger than usual. However, I settled to go with 33% crit rate and have other forms of utility instead. With this Bunny build, without picking up any mana or killing enemies, you can run for 189 meters before you fully run out of mana. That's just straight up sprinting with her second ability, 189 meters. Yes, I did actually measure the distance. Now, of course, if you kill enemies, pick up mana, etc., you're able to continue sprinting. Now, the only downside about this build is that I only focus this on a mobbing setup for general gameplay and even hard mode infiltrations, because I don't boss with Bunny and I prefer using supports like Enzo or Luna in bossing, and even sometimes pulling out my VIDS. So I thought it would be better for my Bunny to be a pure ad clear unit. And we're still waiting on the upcoming patch where we can have multiple socket types on different loadouts. In the future, we'll see how this works out so I can have a bossing build alongside a pure mobbing build min-maxed to the T. If you want to know more about how Bunny works, you can definitely check out the other videos, but I'm not going to be talking about that, and we're going to go straight into the build. So let's take a look at all the things I put together to make this work. I currently have no mods, and I'll show you how to put everything together. But first, let's start off with the reactor, weapon synergy, and even the components. For those who have seen my last video, you may have noticed I've swapped away from using the Supernova set, but I'm still keeping 2 pieces of the Supernova set just because of that electric skill power modifier. That actually does increase our damage. Not by a significant amount, but a noticeable amount. For my reactor, I do have the electric singular reactor, as this affects Bunny's third ability, as that's our main focus on this build, and it does have the blue Beetle mounting. The blue Beetle is going to be a synergy with Bunny over here, and plus it's a very strong weapon and looks freaking cool. Now, there are 2 things that you want to have on your reactor substats. Primarily, you want to have crit damage. That is a big damage increase when you do end up critting. Now, for the other substat, you can either go with skill cooldown, or skill critical hit rate, even skill effect range. Now, for those wondering, what about skill cost reduction? Unfortunately, with skill cost reduction, you only get around 0.4 skill cost reduction, even though with a gold skill cost reduction. I tested this and it's barely noticeable. So for those who are thinking about having critical hit rate as a second substat, and those for thinking about putting a critical hit rate as a substat there, you will increase your critical hit rate by around 3%. Right now, as I said, I have no mods. Bunny's crit rate is at 10%. If we do get a 31% increase to our crit rate, it goes up by 3%. Range does boost our range by a meter. If you have noticed, we go from 7 to 8.6 meters. If we get a gold range increase, that goes up by 0.2. So purple is still just fine. Oh yeah, another thing, if you do want to increase your damage even further, a singular boost power ratio is also nice, or any form of boost ratio that increases your damage on the third ability. Electric boost ratio, singular boost ratio. And now for the components, as I said, I moved away from Supernova set, but I'm still running 2 pieces of Supernova set. And the choices for my components are actually very important because this greatly affects how much we drain with Bunny's second ability. With no mods, as you can see right there, I have 458 mana. That is very important for Bunny. Starting off with auxiliary, it is an open world auxiliary that you can get. Main stat HP, substat, HP, and MP recovery out of combat. Ideally, you want this in gold, but unlucky there. But this is the God Roll combo that you want for the auxiliary. And then for the sensor, again, the God Roll combo, max HP, max MP as the substat, definitely in gold, and MP recovery in combat. So now we have two forms of MP recovery out of combat and in combat. Now, all of those sources of MP recovery are affected by an MP recovery modifier. And this is what I have right now on my memory. Main stat defense, substat defense. Of course, gold will be way better, but that MP recovery modifier is a huge boost to how we can upkeep our bunny's sprint. So it ends up being nearly infinite. And unfortunately, you can't do anything about the sensor over here, but we do get defense and max shields. And the toxin resistance is nice to have. Now, the big mana pool is actually very important because even without any mods, you can see bunnies not draining that much mana. So this is why max MP is super important. We're still able to sprint quite a bit even though we have no mods. That's very impressive. So let's take a look at that bunny build. You may have noticed a couple of things have changed. When I say a couple, more like 4 things have changed. I've added 4 A sockets, and all of these A sockets are going to be related to crit. But let's start off with the basic stuff. So let's start off with the basic stuff, and then we'll move on to all the juicy stuff. Mid-air maneuvering is a must for this loadout. This just helps Bunny cover more distance and not have to worry about actually grappling onto anything. And for our skill module, I'll be using High Voltage. This mod right here affects the first and third skill, where it reduces the cooldown of the first and third skill and also increases its skill power and range. Notice we went up from base 7 meters to base 9 meters. Now onto the skill power and power modifier. The X socket is going to be, of course, our focus on electric. Focus on electric here gives me 77.2% skill power and skill cooldown reduction. And then I'll be running focus on singular. Both of these will affect my third skill. And the skill power modifier affects the motion value of the third skill. Now, these two plus the high voltage and the mounting reactor will affect my outgoing base damage on my abilities. Now I want to improve the damage on my abilities when I crit. So we're going to switch over to the A sockets. And we're filling in all the crit mods that we can. Starting out with Skill Insight. This is our skill critical hit rate. This gives us 115% skill crit. Following up with Emergency Measures. This also grants me crit rate, but skill crit damage as well. And we're not stopping there. Skill Concentration for my raw crit damage, and then finally Front Lines for even more crit damage and crit rate. When we save, we have 207.7 crit rate and crit damage. A lot of people in the comments on my previous video were confusing this crit number as their actual crit number. This number is the applied value, as it shows right there. Applied value, applied value. Your actual crit modifiers are shown here, 30% and 4.4. So whenever we crit 30% of the time, we're multiplying that damage by 4.4 times. That's how that works. 4 crit mods, which is pretty insane already. And I have 2 R mods, and these are all going to be focused on range. So, skill expansion for range, that is increased by 92.3%, and amplification control. This gives me range by 51% and max shields. Usually, you could go with maximize range, but I'd want to keep my skill power modifier a bit up this time. But this also grants me some survivability with shields. Now, the C socket is obviously going to be health. The last slot here is going to be maximize conservation. This reduces my skill cost by 35.4%, but then it reduces my skill power modifier. This, paired with my massive mana pool, is what affects my long duration sprint. Remember, skill power modifier affects the motion value of your third skill. These enemies over here have a higher resistance to electricity because they are weak to toxin. You can see right there, we're critting for 607, and then the 120k is the follow-up electrocution damage. Now, if I summon enemies who are weak to electric, you can see right there, these guys deal more toxin damage, but they're weak to electric. You'll be able to see my damage spike significantly against these guys. Cast the 1, and here we go. Right now, 1.4 million damage when we crit. And of course, the damage is a lot more satisfying to look at. With the blue Beetle, ideally you want to have a crit damage, weak point damage, crit rate, and colossus damage here, but I did roll firearm attack, so I'm just keeping this for now until I get more gambling materials. The blue Beetle does have a unique perk that increases your critical rate if you use a fusion skill. Bunny's first skill is fusion, so you're going to be casting this ability every 10 seconds when it goes out of cooldown. And another important note about the blue Beetle, you never want to use this on your descendants if it's not fully maxed, because let's take a look at that unique ability. Notice over here it says skill cost. Originally, this does drain a decent amount of your mana if you use abilities. So before you use it on Bunny, make sure you max it out. Now, when using a fusion skill, grant self the unique ability Arcane Energy with a set chance. Now, when you max it fully, Arcane Energy is a 100% chance to grant you 30% critical hit rate. This is an additive multiplier and not a flat increase, unfortunately. If it was a flat increase, Bunny would have a 60% crit rate, which is actually the best thing you want to have, but unfortunately it is an additive multiplier and it lasts for 10 seconds, and our first ability will go off cooldown before that 10 seconds, so we can refresh this pretty often. And we do have purification. When you cast a singular skill, you cleanse yourself of any sort of status effects, debuffs, yada yada yada. It's a decent weapon with 25% crit rate, a 1.8 critical damage multiplier, and a 1.5 weak point damage multiplier. So we can see over here when we hit our headshots, we're dealing decent weak point damage. And when we end up critting, it's around 587k damage. When you cast your first skill, which is fusion, you will get that buff right there. That is when you know you have a crit chance increase. That 30%, of course, gives you 3% to your base of 10%. Taking a look at that modding real quick, I do have base damage multipliers coming from action reaction, rifling reinforcements, and real life fighters. So upon successfully attacking weak point, that's a headshot or the shoulders, whatnot, you get 10% base damage. This stacks up to 10 times. If you fail, basically skill issue, and you miss, you lose 2 stacks, but you can easily readjust it. Crit rate, crit damage, and crit damage. So our modded crit rate right now is 33.75%. If we get some bonus crit rate from the substat, we can take this up to at least 35%. Not much, but still pretty useful to have. The last damage modifiers are weak point, sight, and heavy aiming. Both of these increase my weak point damage, which takes my weak point damage all the way up to 2.794. Now the last 2 sockets are C. Recycling Genius, this increases my reload speed modifier because I do have negative reload right here. So I want to counteract that with this mod. And then finally I do have Concentrate Support Ammo. This increases my rounds per magazine and gives me some crit damage. So my rounds go from 16 to 20. I get 4 extra shot. However, if you don't care too much about that 4% increase in crit damage, you can always run this and get 23 rounds in the mag. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is the new and improved Bunny that focuses on dealing a bit more damage, has crits, and nearly infinite sprint. That has been it for me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video, and if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more First Ascending content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.